Okay, welcome to another Urban Outdoorsman SoCal video. My name is Danny Milton, and today we're going to be reviewing the Ibis Mojo HD4. Alright, so one other thing I'm going to do a little bit different in this video is typically my bike review videos, I have a lot of, POV footage of me riding the bike. I'm going to kind of, cut that down a little bit just so that these review videos are a little bit shorter. I know my last review was really long. It was like 45 minutes. So I'm going to cut down the actual POV footage. I'm just going to go through a couple of the trails, show you some clips of it, but it's going to be mostly me talking. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep all of that footage, all the POV footage that I had on this HD4. I'm just going to make a separate video. It's going to be just me talking very little bit and me just, going down full runs of Sleigh Ride, Comet, and Arrow. So if you want to watch that, click on the link right here and you can watch that full video. It's going to have all the POV footage. So Ibis is based out of Northern California, and their bike frames are made in China, and most of their other parts are made in Taiwan. The warranty on the frame is to the original owner, and it is for 7 years. So the first trail I rode this bike down was Sleigh Ride at Sky Park. Sleigh Ride is kind of like a downhill pump track. There's some tabletop jumps here and there, but it's mainly just like a speed run. It's a great run at the start of the day just to warm up, feel out a bike, and start the day off.
Playful, baby. Playful, 27.5s.
So the second trail I rode this bike on was Comet Trail. Comet Trail is kind of the enduro trail at Sky Park. There's a lot of rock gardens, there's a couple of wood features, there's some North Shores, some real tight switchbacks, a couple of little drops. There's one real good like wood featured drop off that you take near the end of the trail, which is a lot of fun as well. And the bike did amazing.
A little skinny, a little wood, a little down. Oh yeah, it's definitely, those 29ers felt good, but man, 27.5 is so playful. We'll see how it does in all these tight little switchers. Some ruts. Oh, that was a piece of cake right there. Little foot down. Woo. Come on. Come on. Keep your balance. I got it. Almost lost it. The first left turn, almost lost it. Just kept going. Piece of cake with that drop. Woo. Wow, I came off that, still landed a little front tire and still took it like a champ. Oh, this bike is awesome.
The final trail I rode this bike on was Arrow. I did Upper Arrow and Lower Arrow. Arrow at Sky Park is kind of like the mini jump line. They have the big jump line trail, and I'm not advanced enough to do that yet. But Arrow, there's a bunch of tabletop jumps, there's a couple of drops here and there, and it's a lot of fun, and the bike did awesome on this as well. It was super light through the air. You know, it didn't feel heavy. It would pop, you know, the front end would pop up nice and easy. You know, it's got short chain stays, so bike did really good on this trail as well.
Come on, get your foot there. Oh, got you, baby. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo! Fuck yeah! Yeah.
So before we get into the review, I want to talk a little bit about the bike and, you know, what type of bike this is and who this bike is made for. This is an enduro bike. It's a long travel bike. It's got very slack head tube and seat tube angles, and it's made for, you know, some pretty rough terrain. We're going to go over some of the specs real quick. The front travel, the fork is 160 millimeters, and that can actually be upgraded to 170 millimeters. The rear travel is 6 inches, which is 152 millimeters. Some of the components that you can get on this bike, it comes with all different types of drivetrains. Basically SRAM, you know, if you get it directly from Ibis, you can get the NX, the GX, the X01 or the XX1. It comes with Fox suspension. It has a Fox 36 Performance in the front and the Fox DPX2 in the rear. You can also upgrade both of those shocks to the Fox factory in the front and the X2 for the rear. This bike also has a DW link suspension with the shock going front to back. That's how it's compressed compared to, like, you know, a giant bike where the shock, it has like a rocker arm and the shock gets pushed, you know, up and down vertically. The DW link suspension, I think, is a little bit better for climbing. You can leave the shocks wide open and there's still really good low bump sensitivity, but there's not a lot of bob in the back end as you're pedaling. You know, a bike like, you know, my bike that I have is a Giant Rain. With that rocker arm, the shock, you know, as the rear end goes up, it kind of rotates that rocker arm and it pushes the shock straight down. Whereas the DW link, the shock is going backwards, forward to back like this, and I think that's better, you know, as far as transferring the weight and better at climbing up the hills. Another great aspect of this bike is that the seat tube, the actual seat tube itself, is long and straight, so you can actually put a really long dropper post in there, anywhere from 150 to maybe up to 200 millimeter if you have an extra large frame. A couple of the other features, the wheelbase, I'm looking at my notes right now, the wheelbase is 1251 millimeters and the reach is 480 millimeters. I'll go over a little bit later in the video how I feel about those as in comparison to my bike. My bike is a little bit longer in the wheelbase and has about a 50 millimeter longer reach, but we'll talk about that later. The tires it comes with are the Maxxis Minions. Those are the 27.5 by 2.6. I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. I think that's a little bit that's a little bit too wide for what I typically run, especially if you have a 2.6 in the back, but we'll talk about that later as well. And then, like I said previously, there are some things that you can upgrade straight from Ibis. You can upgrade the front shock, the rear shock. You can upgrade the handlebar to a carbon handlebar. It comes with an aluminum one. You can also upgrade to carbon wheels. Those are the Ibis 742 carbon wheels, and that's about an $800 upgrade. If you want to upgrade the front fork, the Fox Performance to the Fox Factory, that's about a $500 upgrade. And then the rear shock, if you want to upgrade from the DPX2 to the actual, what is it, the Float X2, that's about a $270 upgrade. So when I'm reviewing this bike, I always compare it to what I normally ride. My bike that I ride all the time, I'm sure if you've watched any of my other videos, is a Giant Rain. I am 6'2", about 230, 240 pounds, depends on how much of a pack, you know, how heavy my pack is. I ride an extra large frame on pretty much every bike I've ridden. I know very few companies have like a double X frame, but I've never tried one. Usually XL frames fit me pretty well. My Giant Rain, I like the way it feels. You know, it's really slack. It's just not the greatest going uphill. So when I'm comparing, you know, when I say, like, for instance, we're going to talk about the initial feel of the HD4 right now. So when we're talking about the initial feel, it's when you first sit down on the bike, how does it feel? Does it fit the way you want it to work? Meaning, like, if you want a cross-country bike, you want to be sitting up high. You want a shorter reach. You want steeper head tubes. You want a steeper seat tube angle, all that kind of stuff. Well, this is an enduro bike. An enduro bike, everything is pushed farther back. It's slacked out more. So on the HD4, the head tube angle is 64.9 degrees, and the seat tube angle is 74 degrees. Now, I'm used to, my Giant Rain is pretty close to that, except for my seat tube angle is a little more slack at 73 degrees. And the way this bike feels, it feels similar as far as the head tube and the seat tube angle goes. What the biggest difference for me is when I sat down on the HD4 was the reach. The reach is shorter than what I'm used to. The reach on the HD4 is 480 millimeters. Now, it all depends on everybody's body shape is different. You know, you might have a longer torso, you might have short legs, you might have really long legs and a short torso. You might have super long arms like Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant's arms are like a foot longer than he is tall, which is crazy, right? My arms are kind of average, I guess. The 495 millimeters that I'm used to on my Giant Rain feels really good, especially when I'm going downhill. But, you know, maybe uphill, maybe it's a little bit too far. Whereas the HD4 has a 480 millimeter reach, which kind of, it's a little farther back. I mean, it's a little closer to my chest, so I'm not reaching as far, right? Reach. And it's just a different feel. So another aspect is how well the suspension feels when you sit on the bike. I really like Fox suspension. I know I have rock shocks on my Giant Rain, but Fox suspension, you know, just the performance stuff, not even the upper end factory, just the performance shocks and rear shocks feel really good to me. That's what the HD4 has, and it felt really good when I sat down on the bike. Another aspect that's different from what I'm used to on the HD4 is that the handlebars are 780 millimeters. Now, that sounds like a lot. If you have smaller handlebars than that, that's going to sound like crazy. I mean, you know, 10 years ago, guys were riding like 600 millimeter, you know, handlebars. But the wider the handlebar is, the easier it is to control the bike when you're going in a straight line, because you have your hands out wider and they're not as close to the center point where the stem is, so it's easier to control going in a straight line. Now, turning, like in switchbacks and in tight corners, a little narrower handlebar is probably going to be a little bit better. But like I said, I'm not used to that. And 20 millimeters doesn't sound like a lot, but it really is. If you cut 10 millimeters off of each side of your bars, it's about a ½ inch, a little bit more. It will make a difference as far as just the way the bike feels when you're turning. And at the same time, it probably won't feel quite as stable, you know, when you're going down some really straight, fast, rocky section. And the last thing I noticed on this bike is that it had 4-piston brakes front and rear. I'm used to 2-piston brakes front and rear. I have XT brakes on my Shimano XTs, and they seem to do the job pretty good. I have a 203 millimeter rotor on the front of my bike and a 180 in the rear. The HD4 comes with 180s front and rear, but with the 4-piston brakes, I mean, it had plenty of stopping power. So the next thing we're going to talk about is how it felt climbing. Now, this is usually a sore point for most enduro bikes. You know, like I've said, my Giant Rain, it's amazing going downhill. It's not the greatest thing to climb. It's pretty slack. The reach is really long. The wheelbase is really long. So if you have to get it through like a little rocky technical section, it's kind of difficult to do. I mean, I'm sure some people can do it. I can't. I'm not really good at it. But the HD4, like I said, it has a shorter reach, so you're not reaching as far, so it's going to put your body, your chest a little bit more upright, a little bit closer to those handlebars. So it's going to be a little bit easier, you know, wiggling your front tire through some of those rocky sections. So what's great about a 2.6 tire when you're going downhill is it's going to have a lot of squish, and it's going to have a huge tire patch. So you're going to be in control. It's going to be nice and soft on those little tiny hits. But when you're climbing, you know, it's going to have more resistance as you're going uphill, and it's also going to be a lot heavier, which is going to slow you down, you know, just that little bit more. Okay, so what's great about modern geometry that a lot of enduro bikes have nowadays is that everybody is getting a slacker head tube, which makes it easier for you to sit back farther when you're going downhill. But at the same time, everybody is steepening up the seat tube angle. So the seat tube angle on this bike is 74 degrees, which is 1 degree steeper than what I'm used to. And what that steeper head tube does is it puts your hips closer to the vertical position over your cranks, over the center part of your cranks. So what that means is you can push straighter down with your legs instead of having to reach out in front of you. I don't know if you've ever ridden like a recumbent bike where the pedals are way out in front of you. It's a different feel, whereas if you're pushing straight down with all the force of your leg, it's just going to be more efficient. You're going to use less, you know, energy getting uphill, and it's going to be a lot easier. So another thing that was great about the bike that I demoed was it had carbon wheels. And carbon wheels are a lot of money, and if you have the money, you know, I would definitely go for carbon wheels. I don't have that much money. You know, I have aluminum wheels on my bike, but the carbon wheels are going to A, be lighter, B, they're going to be stronger, and they're not gonna flex as much, especially, you know, uphill or downhill. You know, when you're going through those rock gardens, you're going through tricky little spots, they're not going to flex. They're going to stay straighter. There's not going to be any wobble in those because they're stronger, and it's going to make it easier going uphill and downhill. Okay, so how did this bike do on the descent? It was amazing. You know, like the Ritmo I just did a couple of weeks ago. I did Sleigh Ride. It's kind of like a warm-up trail. I did the Aero Trail, which is kind of like a mini jump trail, and then I did Comet, which is the enduro trail. It was amazing on all three trails. You know, I'm going to link in a bunch of footage and show you how it did. It was super fast and nimble on Sleigh Ride, which is kind of like a pump track, you know, downhill pump track. It was super light and fast through the air on Aero, which is like I said, a mini jump trail. And then on the enduro course, which is Comet, it was awesome. I felt in control. You know, going down the rock gardens through the switchbacks, I was able to get back and forth through those switchbacks. You know, the 27.5 tires makes it really easy. Just, you know, if you get offline a little bit when you're going down through a straight section, a 29-inch tire is going to roll nice and true, very straight. But if you get offline a little bit, it's harder to get back online. Whereas, you know, on the HD4, you've got 27.5s. And yes, you're going to feel a little bit more of that bump and a little bit more of that chatter on, like, you know, going through a rock garden on 27.5s. But it's also at the same time, you can just get back into your line so much quicker with a 27.5. You know, it has that smaller tire patch, you know, contacting the ground, and it just gets back in line much quicker than a 29-inch wheel does. So another great thing was the suspension. The Fox suspension did amazing. You know, it was great through the small bumps. It was great off of the big jumps, those big hits, a couple of drop-offs. It felt amazing as well. The DPX2 shock, you know, one of my favorite rear shocks in the world. The other thing too, because of the DW link, the way this bike, you know, works that rear shock, is I was able to go up and down all of these trails with the shocks wide open. You know, in my Giant Rain, there's a lot of bob, and I have to lock out that rear shock, and it's just one more thing I have to do. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone down trails and forgotten to unlock it. You know, and I get to the bottom, I'm like, wow, that felt really rough. Then I look down and my shock is, you know, locked out. Whereas on the HD4, you know, with that Fox Performance in the front and the DPX2 in the rear, I left them open all day long, and there was no bob going up and down any of the, you know, especially pedaling uphill. There was no bob at all. I mean, very little, and the small bump sensitivity was still really good. You know, when I'd go over that small bump, it would go right back up into the top of the stroke, and, you know, wouldn't sag at all. And the last thing about going downhill is those forward piston shocks did amazing. I didn't have to, you know, I didn't feel like I didn't have enough brakes. Sometimes, you know, as big as I am, you know, like I said, 230, 240, those forward piston shocks, the Shimano Dior forward pistons did an amazing job slowing me down, which is sometimes a problem for other bikes. Okay, so overall, how did I feel about this bike? I love this bike. Of all the bikes that I've ridden, of all the extra large bikes that I've ridden, the enduro bikes that I've ridden, you know, over 10 to 15 different ones, this is probably tied for first with the Yeti SB6. If I could switch the Ibis Mojo HD4 out for my bike right now, I wouldn't even think about it. It's a heartbeat. Boom, you can have it. Give me that bike. I love it. It did a great job. So we talked a little bit about the reach being shorter, about the wheelbase being shorter on the HD4 compared to what I'm used to. Now, like I said, what I'm used to is hard to climb up hills. So maybe Ibis is smarter than I am. Maybe I should have a shorter reach. The 480 millimeter reach on the HD4 and the shorter wheelbase, you know, in conjunction with the head tube angle and the seat tube angle, maybe it's better. Maybe it's where I need to be as far as feeling super comfortable going downhill and being able to climb uphill a lot easier. You know, I'm sure there's trust me, there's lots of people out there that are smarter than me. But you know, like I said, just because you're used to something doesn't mean that you shouldn't try other things. And the different, you know, specs on this bike, I was a little hesitant about, because I mean, some of those things that's a big change for me, and it did amazing. Another reason why I like the HD4 so much is because it has 27.5-inch tires. I like the way most bikes feel with 27.5s compared to like a 29er. I've ridden a couple bikes like the Switchblade that had both 29 and 27.5s. The 27.5s are just, they're more nimble, they're more playful. It's just a totally different feel, you know, because on a 27.5-inch tire, there's less contact, there's less tire contacting the ground. It's more nimble, especially like if you're going through rock gardens and you know you get offline a little bit. This bike and most bikes with 27.5s, you can get back onto your line much quicker, much easier, and you know, less effort with 27.5s than you can with the 29er. The Fox suspension worked amazing. You know, like I said, I love the Fox suspension, the Fox Performance Shock in the front and the DPX2 in the rear. They worked great. You know, they're super plush. The small bump sensitivity was really good. The big hit sensitivity was great. You know, going off some jumps. Like I said, I'm a pretty heavy guy, and you know, I'm gonna work that suspension a little bit more than most people, and it felt great the entire trail. You know, on the enduro trail, it felt great on the jump trail and the pump track trail as well. One other thing about the suspension is in combination with what Ibis has as their DW link, which is how their rear triangle attaches to the front triangle. It's amazing. The whole time, the entire day, I didn't have to lock out the shocks once. They were wide open the entire time, going uphill, going downhill, rock gardens, you know, technical sections, everything. You can leave the suspension wide open, which is great, especially when you're climbing hills. You know, you have that full small bump sensitivity, so you're not feeling those little rock spots, you know, little technical sections as you're climbing the hills as well. And overall, this bike was just a great climber. You know, I didn't climb it. You know, I'll show a little bit of the footage of the trail that I climbed. It's at, you know, Sky Park at Santa's Village. It's not a very steep trail, but you know, you do that trail 5, 10, 15 times throughout the day, and it starts to wear on you, especially if, you know, your bike is a little bit harder to climb up those hills. This bike was the last bike I rode this day. I had ridden a giant bike. I rode the Ripmo before this one, and the HD4 was the last bike I rode that day. I'd been riding all day long, and I rode this trail. You know, I rode this bike up the trail probably 4 or 5 times, and it was, I mean, it wasn't, you know, super easy. It's not like an e-bike going up the hill, but it worked really well climbing the hills as well, which is, you know, a huge factor as far as I'm concerned. This bike is probably, of all the bikes that I've ridden, you know, not including my Giant Rain, it's probably top 2, and it's probably tied right with the Yeti SB6 as far as climbing goes. Now, like the Yeti SB6, this HD4, and my Giant Rain are all very comparable going downhill. The Yeti was probably a little bit more stiffer because that was a full carbon bike, carbon frame, carbon wheels. This bike was carbon frame, carbon wheels, but is cheaper than the SB6. my Rain is carbon fiber front triangle, aluminum rear triangle, and I have aluminum wheels. So it's a little bit of a different feel going downhill. You know, carbon wheels are going to feel much stiffer, much truer. They're not going to get offline. They're not going to wobble or shake as much or bend. But as far as climbing, this bike, the HD4, is pretty comparable to the SB6. I haven't ridden the SB6 for a while. You know, they have their Switch Infinity system, whereas, you know, Ibis has the DW Link. So it's two different types of systems, but they both did really well climbing. And like I said, of all the bikes that I've ridden, the HD4, you know, as far as enduro bikes that I've ridden, the HD4 and the SB6 are probably my top two favorites climbing, and probably those two and my Rain are probably my three favorite going downhill as well. Alright, so thanks for watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. If you have any more questions, please, you know, leave me a comment. I try to answer my questions as soon as I can. Like this video, smash that like button, comment, share, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you on the next one. Okay, last but not least, what you can do to help me out would be to click on one of these boxes in the corners. One's going to take you to a recent playlist, another one's going to take you to a recent video, and always you can click on the logo in the center, the Urban Outdoorsman SoCal logo, to subscribe. Thanks a lot.